Sound and data.
So Martin Keary, this is a recording for my podcast channel on creative disturbance called Sound and Data, and you came to my attention because I ran across a YouTube called Sonification. So I always check that stuff out since I've been kind of working in this field, and I had my socks blown off because you were talking exactly about the thing I've been. I don't know, the thing that's been bothering me the most about this whole deal. So why don't you give a little bit of background about what you? So you're saying you're at work. You work as a graphic designer, from what I understand.
That's right. Yeah, I am. I spend quite a bit of time generally doing stuff to do with music, but it doesn't pay the bills. So I rely on my design background to make money. So I'm a contractor. I work freelance for various companies, designing software. Currently working with Microsoft, and I'm helping them build the new version of Microsoft Paint, which was released about a year ago.
Wow, just helping with the UI kind of stuff and that kind of thing?
The UX and UI, both together.
Well, see, that's really interesting because that's the place where sonification has got at least a little bit of a foothold. And by a little bit, I mean the fact that when you send a mail on a Mac, it goes whoosh.
Right.
That's about it. I mean, the thing I'm coming up with, and I've really been working on this. I mean, I'm getting paid full time to work on sonification, is that it's a huge fail. Like monster fail. And not that it doesn't have, like, as you pointed out, amazing potential, but just that it just hasn't infiltrated the UI UX community the way you would expect. Anybody who is looking into it would expect there to be like more presence of this stuff. It's always like when they're doing Minority Report and Tom Cruise rubs his hand across the thing, it goes or something, but you don't even have that kind of stuff,
It's where, I mean, I guess how do you interact with sound? Do you know what I mean? And also then there's the whole noise pollution thing. I mean, I remember when I first came to London, I used to build Flash websites, and all my websites had sound effects on every button, and sound effects, when it opened and everything, like a little bit like the web back in the early 90s. And I remember just being blasted for it. Don't ever do that. Never, ever, ever have sound on anything because it's intrusive and it's noise pollution, And I suppose it's like what you've said has never occurred to me in 10 years. And it didn't even, I was even blown away when you just said that sonification is actually effects applied to buttons and UI on apps and stuff. It never even occurred to me. Sound effects.
Yeah, right. Well, could you get fired if you start doing it? I mean, it's way more complicated than our intuition about it. That's what I came up with. I mean, it's like I think there's something rich there, and I think you do too. But and then there's the whole, and you did a beautiful job of pointing out all the wankers out there that are like, I don't know what you call it, but I mean, you map everything to the key of C and put some digital delay on it, and hey, there you go. I mean, I got to admit, I'm as guilty of it as anybody. I mean, I've done pieces that are sonifications. I guess the worst one was it was kind of tongue in cheek. It was the sonification of global consciousness, which was this project of the noosphere, which is well, it's a long story, but anyway, I mean, I just thought that was sort of a joke actually about this very thing, with a group I'm with called the Hub, which is an interactive computer network group, and
Right.
which is a whole other thing, which is an actual sonification of the network itself. But here I am talking about myself. Let's get back to your thing. What was this piece? I should have the name in front of me that where the score is followed, that I came across. It was a brilliant trio that you wrote. Can you remind me the name?
Is it a piece that I wrote? A music piece. And it's on YouTube, is it? What could that be? Trio. I've heard. I don't know if there's any pieces for any trio on YouTube. Is it the one? Because there's one with a quartet. It's like a guitar and string trio. I guess that's probably what.
That's it. Guitar and string. If I remember the string trio part, that's what.
Herostratic, that one's called.
Yes, right, and it's just brilliant. I mean, just beautifully composed. And I at my roots, I'm a composer, and I admire contemporary classical music. So I just have to give you kudos for, so you got a place to talk from. You're not just like, well, you're not just being a critic. You're coming from the place of a composer. And I've got to say, I kind of backed into well, I'm talking about myself again, but I'm going to do it.
No, please, it's fine.
Yeah,
I'm actually
I backed into using sonification. The thing is, I had worked with Tudor and Cage right around the end of their lives, and
yeah.
so indeterminacy was a big deal in my compositional palette, right? And then all of a sudden computers were able to give you numbers, and so I just thought of them as like yarrow sticks, for chance operations in pieces. So but then later on it was identified as sonification that I was doing, you know, and
Mm.
so I kind of backed into this whole field. I did these pieces with digital elevation models back in the '90s, actually. That the compositional determinant was the elevation of the land and stuff like that. And and I wasn't trying to talk to geologists or anything. I was just trying to make music, So
But it's great fun to grab some data and just map it to some music or map.
I mean, you did a nice job with that thing with your Eurovision video.
That one. Yeah, like that was great fun to do.
The sonification YouTube that I saw that you did, that's very professionally produced and has pointers to a bunch of things in it. But I'll make sure that when we do the write up for this podcast, that the pointer to that YouTube is there, and plus pointers to this quartet, that guitar and string trio quartet that I was referring to, so that people can get a feel for why I think it's important to talk to you about all this.
Sure.
So yeah, you've gotten a lot of feedback. Doug, I haven't been able to get Doug Kahn to come on because he just thinks of himself as a musical and science theorist. But he had a lot of pushback from me on Facebook when I posted your sonification YouTube.
Mm. I read a bit of it.
Some towards you when I thought I'd reach out to you for this talk.
Yeah, I was intrigued actually. I was really I was sort of blown away that there was a conversation happening that I wasn't aware of, and it was really entertaining to read through it.
Well, those Australians they really feel strongly about this. I mean, most of the people that are doing really serious work are in Australia. I mean, David Worrell is now in Chicago at Columbia University, but I mean, his PhD dissertation is actually really quite in depth and really excellent about sonification, and he's aware of all these problems as well.
I think it's like the problem I have, not just with that video but with other ones, is I mean, I'm deliberately not academic in these videos. I play things for laughs. I'm a little bit harsher than than you would reasonably be, I suppose. And sometimes it's not enough to just say in a video, I respect this discipline, and now I'm going to rip into quite a few examples of how it's done badly, because people kind of like, it's nice that you said you respect the discipline, but some people don't believe it. They think you're actually ripping into the discipline. And I kind of feel that Douglas Kahn kind of thought that I was dismissive of the entire discipline of sonification, which I'm obviously not, at all. And
there is one problem I had that got pointed out, which was, I mean, sometimes you do have to change time scale and do remappings just to successfully look at the data. And you sort of are very dismissive of that in the video. Although there's some point at which you say something like, well, that's got to happen. But, but the thing that really gets me is do you think those guys who did the Higgs boson heavy metal thing were serious? Or do you think that was a lark?
No, they totally weren't serious.
Right? I mean, so a lot of this stuff is, like you pointed out, what are they up to there?
I really shouldn't have used that clip, because those guys are just having fun, and they could even just be, for all I know, they're actually making the same point I am by doing what they're doing, But it's just such a good clip, I had to use it, That's one of the real trouble. That's the real trouble with these YouTube videos, and I'm still learning, because I need an editor or something, because when I send them out, It's happened time and time again where someone points out either like a straightforward technical mistake, and it's sometimes it's a typo in my script. Where I say something and it's actually I might mean the opposite or something. There's one where I describe wavelengths. I say you should shorten them, and I actually mean you should lengthen them. It's little things like that. YouTube doesn't allow you to go in and edit those things. So what I do is I often put them into the video description, but no one reads those. I kind of wish they were a bit more live so I could make changes. Because I do sometimes regret some of the things I put in, and those guys doing that metal thing. When I look back on it, I happen to use that clip at a point where I use the term dilettante, and it just synced up with that video. And now looking back on it, it just feels way meaner than it should have been.
Well, the nice thing about it, though, is visually you can see how much the music notation looks like the graph they're working off.
Yeah, it is. That's fast.
That part was good. And I think they were making the same point you were on a certain level, that you could turn this stuff, anybody can turn this stuff into anything, which is but there's a bigger problem. I mean, for example, and I sent you this thing on Facebook, and I'm going to reach out to this woman, Yoko, I forget her last name right now, but she had an emergency room thing happen to her, but she's a composer, and she's laying in bed, and she just starts going, "Oh, this sounds awful," and so she took this as part of her research. She took the sounds of the things and just tuned them up to an F major chord, and it improved the sound of the emergency room about 50% or 60% or something, just in terms of you could still hear the alarms, but at least it wasn't just like this major ninth chord or something, or flat nine, I guess.
Sort of doing what Oscar Wilde encourages us to do is to try and make everything as beautiful as possible. I mean, I guess they're deliberately horrible, aren't they? Because they want to alert people and they want to stand out, so they use these really filthy, very loud, nasty, dissonant, intervals and stuff.
But I mean, this is the problem with sonification also. That if you actually sonify things, and let's say not in real time, so you take the sun and 1 second is a day. I think that's okay. But if you make it just sound awful, you're going to only want to listen to like maybe a week, like 7 beats of it, like you did at the beginning of your thing, where it was like these dissonant chords. Bang, 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 bang. I mean, when I was teaching sonification, I would remap everything to C major or some kind of weird gypsy harmonic scale or something like that, and you could just show that you could pitch it to any kind of feel you wanted. Well, not any kind of feel, but you could at least like stylize it, and not even to speak of rhythm. I mean, that's a whole other thing.
I mean, the thing about you've mentioned it twice actually, because I do kind of make fun of the fact that there has to be quite a lot of work being done, especially to time for things like the sonification of the sun. This is really, for me, this is just a really blunt, straightforward issue that I have, which is you're saying one thing and you're actually providing another. And it's more like just an issue of misinformation. I mean, I've no problem if it was presented honestly, but I come across a lot of examples of sonified audio of things in space that are presented as the sound of those things. I don't like it because there's enough noise and misinformation out there already. And it worries me because of the implications. I mean, if you choose to hook the data up to notes limited to 12 notes in Western harmony, you're potentially reinforcing the idea in the mind of someone who doesn't know anything about music that those notes are, I suppose, axiomatic, that they haven't been arbitrarily chosen by humans for technical reasons, but that they're actually pre-human, like chosen by God or something. You could be accidentally giving someone the impression that music has a special relationship to space in some vague way, or even worse, you could be confirming a religious bias of some kind, proof that God created everything, or something like that. It's like, for example, when you think about that weird sect of people who think that A should be tuned to 432 hertz. You know about that one? That conclusion.
I totally did a theater production where I tuned everything to 432, just so I could say I could do it, and just to see if anybody noticed. And it was like, not, it didn't change anything. And
who is it? Verdi? Verdi's the one who did that, and then everyone kind of points to him and says, "Oh, well, Verdi did it."
No, I mean, the thing it comes from, if you look into it, is it's like number theory, right? 432 happens to have some relation to 108 and 12 and 6 and 3 and 2, and I mean, in terms of the least common multiple, it gets all like full of these like sacred numbers and stuff like that. So I think, and I need to do this, but I think there's like this bogus thing with water. If you play 432 as a note, it's more symmetrical. The Chiandi pattern on a.
Yeah, I've heard this that like there's some sort of sacred geometry going on, and that it's related to Fibonacci sequence and the Schumann resonance and all this kind of stuff.
Schumann resonance. See, I got
Yeah.
paid to make a pendant that was like on the Schumann resonance, which is 17 cycles per second. Oh, let me not go there because I could still get, he's still a client. So, but
You send me some links when we're finished talking. There's a lot of stuff you've done that I find I'd love to have a look at.
yeah, right. Well, I mean, the reason why I got excited when I saw your thing is that I really think that there's something there, and I could tell from the way you were talking about it that you have the same feeling, but you're really pointing out the interesting sort of everybody's going for the low hanging fruit, where the high values are high notes, and like somebody's going to know what that means, and and where this woman who's doing the thing in the hospital, that makes a lot more sense to me. I mean, it's like, yeah, let's make the hospital sound beautiful, but also be able to make it dissonant when there's a problem or something, So when you walk in the room, at least it's music-y or new age, or as we call it, new age. Then when something's really going wrong, and suddenly there's a minor ninth note or whatever, like there's something that is dissonant and is alarming, because the one thing that sound can do really well is alert and alarm us, and to make really good distinction.
I suppose, like, if I was to summarize the video or summarize my feeling on sonification, it's a technique. It's a technique like any other. It's obviously a technique with an enormous amount of different varying types of technical skill that you could have to get there. It can be done in a million different ways, and data is an enormous word. It can mean a lot of stuff, and you can obviously convert it to any type of sound. But at its heart, you're converting something that isn't sound or music into something that is, via some conversion process. And I just want to know why someone's doing it, and if it's just doing it because it's a fad, or because, even worse, because like it gives them program, like, especially if you're a composer and you kind of take something like global warming or something like that, and you're like, oh great, this gives me a program that makes my piece sound like it's what's the word I'm looking for, controversial, or particularly interesting to the public, and you're basically, it's got nothing to do with that. And if you're just doing it for the sake of doing it because you think it'll like add some sort of mystification to your work, that kind of bugs me. But like you can like any technique, like 12 tone composition or atonality or whatever, it's all about why you've done it and what the purpose is in the end. I've seen some sonification pieces where I kind of went, oh wow, they've used data and they've done it in a way where they've accomplished some sort of some new statement, something that the sonification by itself didn't do. And if you're a scientist, you've been to the ICAD meetings, haven't you? You've actually seen.
I got disenfranchised with them, frankly. I mean, I shouldn't say this on my podcast, but I would.
I don't know anything about them really, apart from what they're trying to do. But tell me more.
Well, the thing about it is, I have a real problem with the idea, and I interviewed Greg Kramer, who came up with the term of audio display, because it seems sort of like self-defeating to use something about the visual in something that's describing something auditory. Display, if you look at the etymology, is like, a visual thing. And so, it just seems strange to me. And then the real work for at least a lot of, I must admit, it was in the mid 2000s that it seemed to me to become, and this is all great, but it wasn't something I wanted to work on, was the part where you show Wanda, what's her name?
Diaz, is it?
Yeah, Diaz, I think. She's like the astrophysicist who uses sound to do her stuff, and that's a really cool area. That audio display kind of makes sense as an audio display thing. To make the focus of the whole conference be about that, when I was actually, I've had these grandiose ideas, and then I've had other interviews with people that are saying that, and they're like Mark Bellaro, who I would say is probably one of the most successful sonification guys out there now, and he was like the head of the ICAD conference it was at his university at Penn State last year, and he's done a bunch of stuff, but even he's saying there's no like killer app for sonification, and that he's focusing his work on kind of like the natural science museum crowd, and to try to get kids to understand scientific principles with the sonifications he's doing and that kind of stuff. So there's no real linkage to hard science. And kind of like that was surprising. I mean, I was reaching out to him because I had heard some cardiologists were using one of his techniques of monitoring the difference between heart murmurs that he had developed, but it ends up they weren't. And I've had the same thing. I got a DARPA grant last year to do this neuroscience thing, and we worked like crazy on it for over a year and a half. And I've talked to the neuroscientist recently, and he's not using it at all. You know, it's like, okay, you know, gee.
So it was what? It's some sort of sonification of data that would supposedly give him insight quickly into something he's doing. Is this what it was? Was it sonification?
Well, I mean, what's happened in neuroscience is they're actually doing mathematical studies of complex networks, right? They have this fMRI data, which is the blood oxygen level to the different areas of the brain, and they can figure out how much, like, the visual cortex is hooked to the auditory cortex, and how much it's cooked within itself. And actually the thing of what these, so they make these kind of zones that they've kind of roughly defined as the visual cortex, and then that they codify that as a network, and then they know the strengths of the linkages by the blood oxygen level from fMRI data. And so what we were trying to do is sonify that, because it really does look like a rat's nest. I mean, you know, when you
Right.
it just looks like a hairball when you look at it visually. So there's no way to really discern the complexity. So we were working on trying to make it into a kind of Xenoxian, you know, sound cloud that you could focus different attention on and stuff like that. And we did a bunch of different, well, actually developed a bunch of different sonification techniques just trying to solve this complex network problem. But it ends up he's not using any of it.
And how much upfront work would it be, let's say, for him or for someone who works with him, to like a sort of an audio legend, I suppose, where you kind of go, right, well, this is what this sound means. This is what this sound means. Here's how you detect. Well, I mean, I suppose the best way I could put it again is like an audio legend. Here's what these sounds mean. It would take quite a long time to learn that, or did you design it to be intuitive? Is that even possible?
Yeah, I mean, we were working really closely with him, and it was kind of handcrafted. And so this led us to our current workflow of the work we're doing, which is to try to standardize the modules. Because this is one comment you made in your video that I thought was really on point, which is that woman you brought her up over and again, it's really rather arbitrary. Well, that's because there's no standard. I mean, you know, a pie chart is going to be on a circle, and it's going to be made out of slices, and you're going to know it. And when you see a pie chart, it doesn't matter, you know. Then you got to read the legend to find out what the pie chart is about.
That's a really weird idea that, like, in the future we could have reified like collective ideas about what the sound of a pie chart is. Can you imagine that? That's really bizarre.
That's exactly what I'm working on. Actually, that's exactly what I'm trying to figure out.
So you can imagine maybe like quick oscillation between the root and the perfect fifth is a pie chart. You know, as long as
right, exactly. Or, you know, oh, minor ninth. You know, not going to vote for that guy. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, you know, there's maybe reasons. There might be like cognitive reasons. This might be outside of my pay scale in terms of like how brilliant you have to be to pull this off, you know. But there might be like real, like deep reasons, like the fact that you can't turn on a web page and have it start playing a song, you know, and expect anybody to like your web page, you know.
And also, I suppose, like, if the visuals can take care of it, you know, like graphs and pie charts and stuff, or bar charts, where you can track progress quickly over a period of time. You know, there's a serious level of abstraction going on there that we all have sort of learned. You know, like, there's no real reason, I guess, for sound to try and do those things. It's more the things that visuals can't do. Like, I suppose. I mean, I have never worked on a detailed sonification.
Well, I mean, you know, I think that there's just like, it's just all been the low-hanging fruit. It's basically bar graphs to melodies, which is just completely insane.
Yeah, it's been upsetting as well, because like, and that's the other thing that's the other thing that I suppose I wanted to kind of get across in the video, which was just to demystify it a bit, because I've been in Like when I studied in Glasgow a while back, and I went back there just to visit, and we went to some concert, and it was sonification, and all the red flags that I pointed out were visible, right? The emotive topic, completely random, arbitrary sounding, resulting music that was mapped to, to a really pleasant sounding mode. No chances taken whatsoever, and no like honesty about the process of translation. So the person was totally banking on the idea that the audience would have no clue how this was done, and would just be blown away by the concept of converting a thing into music, and he was selling, he was selling it sort of like, I've done some magic wizardry, and really it just kind of bugged me, and I was kind of thinking, you know what, like, let me just point out to people how ludicrously easy this is to do. When you have much data, it's just, all it is a slog, when we're talking about converting it into music. When we're talking about like the deeper scientific stuff, the stuff you're doing, that's a whole different kettle of fish. But yeah, like,
and unsuccessful so far. That's the part that I think is interesting, and maybe impossible. I don't think so, but the thing is, they wouldn't even have come up with sonification without microcomputers, right? I mean, it's like this weird remapping of data to sound wouldn't happen, just like visual graphics wouldn't happen with, like 3D graphics, which is much more fully developed, wouldn't have happened without computer graphic abilities. So we're still in sort of like it's completely nascent. Everything is completely brand new, and nobody's even thought of the definitions of things. I mean, there's this guy Thomas Herman who I haven't been able to talk to, but he did the Sonification handbook. I don't know if you've seen that.
No, I must get my hands on that. What was his name?
His name is Thomas Herman with 2 N's. And if you just type in Sonification handbook, it's quite a quite thorough book about all this. But I mean, I combed through it looking for anything that was, there are all these sort of theoretical ideas about how to do interactive sonification, blah blah blah, all this kind of stuff. But none of I couldn't find an example where, and now they're using this like crazy. Like my friend Peter Sinclair was working with car manufacturers, making this thing that played music while you drove, and like was it was a really cool project. But also there aren't cars now that everybody's going to turn on the radio. They're not going to listen to their like weird sonification.
So it sort of represented musically what you were doing
in the car, yeah, as you drove.
I kind of like the sound of that. If I had a button that did that,
I think it would be a nice option,
Yeah, I'd be intrigued.
Yeah. Peter Sinclair, his work is very interesting, actually. He and I wrote a paper together about acoustic environments and trying to figure out how to do all this stuff. I mean, it's a more complicated field than than what's made it to the press, I guess.
Totally.
And that's which I really appreciated about your video, that you're pointing that out, because I mean, this stuff that just bollocks. I mean, a lot of it, and most of it actually, and so and it's getting in the way of there being anything interesting happening, in my opinion.
Yeah, it just sort of feels like, I mean, I can't better your term low-hanging fruit. It's easy to do, and it gets you a bit of attention, and it seems novel. And yeah, it just feels like, I mean, I'm pretty certain if I put my mind to it, I could use sonification to make, it mightn't be the greatest piece ever, but at least a piece that I feel like is coherent and has something to say. I'm sure it could be used, but it just feels like no one's even trying.
Well, and the thing is, actually, what's great about Cage isn't the Yarrow sticks, right? It's his choices. So that might be the big part of the problem. In other words, the choices that Cage is throwing down for the music of changes. He's throwing down the Yarrow sticks and making a decision, and then he's notating that as a thing, and it's his editorial conceptual model that makes it an interesting piece, not the actual, You know what I'm saying? If we just assume the data is completely arbitrary, then those choices are completely mapped to the style and the ideas of the composer that's involved.
And there's also something to be said for being a pioneer as well, you know, for being a guy who's like trying out stuff that no one else is doing. Like if I was to go out and say, hey, you know what, I'm going to write a piece of music. None of the instruments play anything for 4 minutes. What do you think of my idea? You'd be like, yeah, very good. Kate did that, you know. Like, I mean, it's good when you're just trying stuff out. He's like a musical scientist in a way.
Yeah, well, he was for sure. I mean, a really, actually, incredibly brilliant guy that foresaw the coming of all of this stuff and did it so much better. There's no need to do it. That's kind of what I'm saying, you know.
Yeah, I come back to Cage as well quite a lot when I think about this.
The thing is that I really appreciated your commentary, and I particularly did. I actually called you after I heard the quartet for guitar, and what's the name of that piece again, just so the listeners know what that.
It's called Herostratic.
Herostratic.
Yeah. Incidentally, it was the first thing I wrote when I went to study a master's in classical music, because I'm actually a bit of a late starter with classical music. I was always more into sort of rock and electronic music and punk, and I'd been in bands and stuff. And a bit later on, when I got to my late 20s, early 30s, I decided I wanted to learn music. I wanted to study classical repertoire, and I was always a big fan of Schoenberg and Stravinsky, but I had no clue how they wrote their music. So when I went to my master to study the masters in Glasgow, the very first thing they gave me was they were like, "Here's your instrumentation, go crazy." So yeah, I mean, like I have a lot of issues with it, like structurally, but I put a lot of effort into it, and I think the performance is
analysis of it, but it just struck me as very well crafted and very musical.
I'm pretty proud of it. Yeah, it took me forever to write.
Well, that's great. Are you involved in that at all now, or is just the graphic design thing take up?
No, I'm always writing music. It's really the kids that are soaking up my time at the moment. So actually, what I'm doing is just before I go back and continue on to do a PhD, I think maybe in a couple of years, I've been doing the YouTube video stuff because it's really the only thing I can do right now, because I can't go to rehearsals, I can't go to performances. I've only had 4 performances this year, you know, and I'll probably have less next year. But my hope is that in the next year or two, I'll be able to kind of get back on the horse and get more performances. But I'm still writing music all the time.
Well, it's a hard balance to be able to keep the work going, and you know, I know all about that.
Yeah, everyone has to go through it. The YouTube videos are basically my way of just forcing myself to do some research, so I don't kind of lose my touch, and so I stay in the game a little bit, you know.
Yeah. Well, I guess we've probably covered all the bases here. It's going to be interesting to take the different parts that aren't relevant to what we're supposed to be talking about.
Yeah, sorry.
No, that's all right. No, I like that. I actually like this to be this informal chat, because it's an easier way to get down to the ideas. Oh, one thing I did want to mention before we go is Carla Scaletti. You showed a shot of her giving her keynote speech at the last ICAD. I don't know if you knew, or you must have listened to it since it's online. But anyway, the thing is that was interesting about that talk was that she pointed out that there was like a 10-page brief the first time someone, and I forget the guy's name, French guy, visualized something in a Cartesian, XY way.
Right.
And the audience just couldn't, of 1790, just couldn't see it. That was invisible to them,
I see.
And so she was making the point that sonification, and I think sonification probably, it's like you're saying, if we could figure out some kind of standardization thing, and it would be less about this low-hanging fruit thing of just like, pretending like there's some kind of hidden structure in everything. Anyway, I just wanted to make that.
I mean, you can kind of, it's something you'd learn, but I mean, if you just heard it all the time growing up, if it was around, you would just pick it up, you would get used to it. Like, I mean, when you think of like back to UI that has sound attached to it, when you think of that noise, it usually means something's either gone wrong or something didn't work out quite the way you expected, and then da-dum is like, oh, something's after happening, and those two are used all the time. They're versions of each other, and I don't see why we couldn't get to what you just suggested, some sort of set of slightly more complicated patterns that mean a certain thing, that kind of
As we've been talking about in the research area is this stuff from Marseille called dang, I can't remember now. Anyway, they have a distinct. It's kind of post Pierre Schaeffer, uh, and there's a whole semiotics of types of sound gestures. Darts and swooping, and they all have different. And it's absolutely fascinating. And I'm gonna put that. I'll look it up and put it in the notes that attach to your thing for anybody who listens to this whole thing and gets to the end and wants to know what the Marseille thing is, since I don't have it in front of me. But they're basically time icons, or sound icons, but they're not icons in the sense of like whoosh means your mail is going. They're more like textures and types of sound. Another interesting thing on that level is that they determined that just about everybody, when they do cultural anthropological studies, thinks that pitch that is going up in frequency is rising up. So boo means lifting for some reason, and I guess that has to do with the fact that things that go up make that sound, or I'm not sure, but there are some core sort of psychobiological things that should probably be integrated at least into this medical world stuff, so that the nurses are reacting on an instinctual level because the sound is the appropriate sound for what humans are expecting to hear, and that kind of stuff.
But I'm quite involved in visual music, that whole field, and that's something that I remember when I was years ago, when I was doing some research into it. I got a bunch of sounds and I put them in front of people, and I think if I remember correctly, it was a circle, and the circle is sort of fills up a little bit like in a clockwise motion. It starts off as a little triangle and it slowly fills into a circle. And accompanying that sound, I had like, and then another one which was just a noise like that didn't have any implied motion or implied physics. And all of them, immediately gravitated towards the one that had the filling up sound, because they got the impression that the higher it went, the closer it was to being complete, or something like that. It's really fascinating.
I think that's the kind of level we have to start thinking about.
Funnily enough, I was just thinking I was thinking the opposite, but not to say that I disagree or anything. I was thinking more, isn't it a shame that, for most composers, we're all already thinking about quarter tones and breaking out of standard Western harmony, and we're able to hear, let's face it, we're able to hear far greater nuance in music than a lot of people who don't really study.
Real problem, actually, for sonifiers, because I've run into this over and over again, things that are just so obviously different to me that the client can't even tell the difference,
Yeah. I did, in my most recent video, I did, which is a bit of a basic one about guitar, which is about people who use like root position open chords all the time. I kind of just did the most basic voice leading example, where I kind of show, if you use different inversions of chords, the top note will sound a certain way and it'll sound a little bit more pleasant, or perhaps, I'm just illustrating how voice leading works. And a good few people came back to me and said, I can't hear the difference. And I couldn't believe it. Like to me, the difference is night and day, I'm not even exaggerating. And that is a massive problem, because we can come up with something that we think is like really clear. When it's a fifth and the root, that it means this, and then people will be able to distinguish between the third and the root and the fifth and the root,
Yeah, right. And so we've integrated. The guy I'm working closely with is an astrophysicist, and he's not musically trained, and he's been like my litmus test for this. And so we're trying to associate, if we do get standardized modules for these different types of sonification, then we will definitely have an integrated training module that's going to be designed with HCI in mind and all that kind of stuff. So, well, listen, I'm gonna cut it there, but let's keep in touch and keep talking about this. I hope I piqued your interest in getting more involved in the field in general, because that would be fantastic.
I'd be extremely curious just to see what you've done. Already you have me kind of intrigued, especially the idea of little musical patterns that mean particular type units of measurement or something,
Well, it's called MIMS. I'm kind of remembering the Marseille thing now, but I'm not going to look it up. It's just basically a really brilliant way of trying to characterize the sounds that the electroacoustic reality brought to us, right? I mean, there's a type of sound, but they're present in instrumental music as well. We can identify them pretty easily. But then maybe not. I mean, getting back to this training thing, I mean, it's like things that would seem obvious to us as like, you know, trained musicians might not, you know, so how do you, it's like you can't, it's sort of like, it's hard to know if someone will understand what you're talking about if they don't have the vocabulary for it.
Oh, I just looked up the Sonification handbook. Of course I remember this. This is actually where I learned about the iCAD in the first place.
Right, yeah. And Thomas Herman is he's working very closely with he's like in a technical institute, and I think he might have gotten some people to adopt his stuff, but it hasn't scaled. I mean, you know, so I think that's very interesting because I'm sure there's people that's way more brilliant than I am working on this, and the fact that it hasn't scaled, I can't find an example of any of these things scaling out, is really interesting to me, and means that maybe the whole thing is a fail, you know, which is kind of.
It needs a kind of a public-facing classic example that actually works. That, like, you know, take something that we generally are confused about and show how it's better than visuals or how it's better than any other technique. And of course, then the icing on the cake would be if you could do it in such a way that it would be really intuitive and obvious how it works. I guess it needs that kind of publicity. Says me, who's been attacking people for
Mark Ballora, that was his whole take, was like, I am going to spend my time now making it so people can be more comfortable with sound that represents the data being part of a presentation of the data. I'm not going to try to glorify anything. I'm just going to integrate it into it, and that's all he's been doing. So he's working with like Mickey Hart in his post Grateful Dead era, making these like documentaries that have sonifications of brain stuff and weather patterns and stuff like that, and Mickey is incorporating those sounds into the mixes of his drum stuff, and so it's a way of kind of popularizing it. It's absolutely not scientific, but this guy's real authentic, though, is the thing. Yeah. Okay, well, you got to get going. I don't want to keep you from your little guys, and you know, I just really appreciate. Okay, fly on the wall. We're going to get going now. This is the Sound and Data channel signing off.
Sound and data.